They saw a man lounging at the pool, wearing a designer watch, scrolling through emails on his tablet, and sipping a cold drink. But instead of seeing success, they saw suspicion. Instead of seeing a business leader on a break, they saw someone who, in their eyes, didn't belong. It didn't matter that the pool was private. It didn't matter that the man had keycard access. It didn't matter that his name was on the building lease. All that mattered was how he looked. Black skin, relaxed posture, confidence. In that moment, it was all misread as a threat. The front desk received a complaint. A concerned resident mentioned someone out of place at the pool. "I don't think he lives here," they whispered. "He didn't look like someone who belongs in a place like this." The staff, trained to be polite but not necessarily to be just, sent security without verifying anything. A man who had poured his energy, his vision, and his capital into this property, a man who had created jobs, signed deals, and led teams, was about to be questioned like an intruder. This wasn't a one-time misunderstanding. It was the echo of a much deeper pattern. The way Black people, regardless of success, are often required to prove they belong in the spaces they've earned. There is a long history in this country of questioning Black presence in elite or exclusive environments. Whether it's a college campus, a luxury store, a corporate boardroom, or in this case, a high-end pool, too often, the assumption is that they're guests, outsiders, or even threats. The gatekeeping doesn't always come in the form of locked doors or written rules. Sometimes, it comes as side glances, polite suspicion, or passive-aggressive comments framed as concern. The power of assumptions works silently, embedding itself into daily life, dressed up in the language of policy or safety. But underneath the surface lies a truth. People are measuring worth and permission based on race before they ask a single question. What's most revealing is not that the man was approached, but how swiftly people moved from seeing to judging. No effort was made to speak with him, to say hello, or to engage with respect. The judgment came instantly, quiet, sharp, and automatic. This isn't just about one man in a pool. It's about a system that makes Black excellence invisible unless it's labeled. It's about how wealth doesn't always protect against bias. A white man in flip-flops and gym shorts might be assumed to be a tech founder or venture capitalist. But a Black man in a tailored swimsuit and designer sunglasses might be assumed to be suspicious or loitering. The same appearance, the same confidence, viewed through a different lens, creates a different reaction. And yet, despite all this, the man stayed calm. He knew who he was. He didn't need to raise his voice or explain himself to people who weren't really listening. Because deep down, he understood the power of identity, not just the one assigned by others, but the one he had built through years of work. The irony was almost poetic. The very people who questioned his right to be there were likely benefiting from the community he built, the services he provided, or the property he owned. They were questioning the architect of their own environment. What this moment revealed was that assumptions don't bend to facts unless confronted. The man's presence disrupted a narrative people had already formed in their minds. To them, success looked a certain way. Professionalism wore a certain face. Belonging had a skin tone. When reality didn't match their expectation, they chose to believe the expectation and discard the reality. This story reminds us how far we still have to go. It shows us that bias isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes, it's quiet, polite, and deeply ingrained. It shows up in the way people are watched, questioned, or checked. It thrives in places where people believe they are being reasonable. But being reasonable doesn't mean being right. And being polite doesn't erase prejudice. The assumption made about this man wasn't just a social slight. It was a challenge to his legitimacy, a challenge to his right to exist freely in a space he had helped create. A challenge born from a narrow view of who gets to relax, who gets to belong, and who gets to be seen without suspicion. When security approached him at the poolside, they expected resistance. They anticipated anger, perhaps even confrontation. But what they got was something far more powerful: composure. The kind of calm that comes not from fear or submission, but from strength. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend himself with panic. He simply asked, "Is there a problem?" It was a question that didn't just acknowledge the situation, it flipped it. It forced the accuser to justify themselves, to say aloud what they had only assumed silently. That simple act of restraint turned a moment of accusation into a moment of exposure. Composure in the face of confrontation is often misunderstood. Some mistake it for weakness or passivity. But in reality, it takes more strength to stay calm when you're being wrongly accused than it does to lash out. Especially when the accusation isn't about what you've done, but who you are. When someone challenges your right to exist in a space you've earned, your natural instinct may be to push back. But choosing composure isn't surrender, it's strategy. It creates space for truth to surface, for bias to reveal itself. In that moment, the man had a choice. He could have listed his credentials, pulled up his lease, or demanded apologies. But instead, he stood still, present, certain, aware that the burden of proof should not be his to carry. He didn't need to prove that he belonged. The fact that he was there, relaxed and confident, was proof enough. His presence in that moment was a quiet protest against the assumption that he was trespassing, that his success must be explained or validated. Composure isn't about staying silent. It's about controlling the energy of the room. When someone accuses you unfairly, their goal is often to provoke a reaction, to paint you as the problem. By remaining calm, you deny them that narrative. You expose their discomfort, their bias, and their assumption. And when the people around you see that you're unshaken, they're forced to ask themselves why they're the ones feeling nervous. Why is this calm man being interrogated while doing nothing wrong? In leadership, especially for Black men and women, composure is not just a personality trait. It's survival. It's a shield against misinterpretation. Because when anger is expressed by Black voices, it's often labeled as aggression. Passion becomes hostility. Assertiveness becomes threat. That double standard creates a pressure cooker, where even justifiable emotion must be managed with precision. In this moment by the pool, the CEO wasn't just protecting his dignity. He was protecting his narrative, making sure that the story told about him wasn't one written in panic, but in power. The deeper truth is that many people are uncomfortable with calm confidence in those they expect to be submissive. A Black man sitting in peace at a luxury pool, unbothered and unreadable, can be more disruptive to their assumptions than someone yelling in protest. Because that calm presence contradicts the story they've been told. That success looks one way, sounds one way, and belongs to one kind of person. When someone doesn't fit that mold and yet walks with complete ease, it disturbs the hierarchy. It says, I'm not here by accident. I'm not a guest. I'm not here for your approval. I built this. I lead this. Composure also invites witnesses to pay attention. Security guards, residents, bystanders, all become part of the scene. And the man's calm makes it harder for others to justify their own discomfort. It makes the accusers seem impulsive, overreactive, even petty. Because when one person is calm and the other is defensive, the imbalance is undeniable. And that imbalance starts to shift public perception. People begin to ask, why did we assume he didn't belong? Or why did we jump to conclusions? This quiet kind of power is not often celebrated, but it is deeply effective. It forces people to see the humanity they ignored. It compels them to face their own biases without shouting or spectacle. And it leaves a mark, one that lingers far longer than any angry outburst ever could. The man, by staying calm, didn't just protect himself in that moment. He taught everyone around him a lesson in dignity, a lesson in restraint, a lesson in leadership that can't be taught in boardrooms or seminars. It's easy to be calm when you're respected. It's hard to be calm when you're being disrespected for no reason other than the color of your skin. But that's where the power lives. In choosing stillness when the world expects a storm. In turning accusation into revelation. In making the room realize that the real disruption isn't you. It's their expectation of who you're supposed to be. Luxury spaces have long been symbols of achievement, wealth, and arrival. Pools in gated communities, penthouses overlooking skylines, private gyms with concierge service. These places represent a lifestyle associated with success. But for many Black individuals, stepping into those spaces doesn't just mean enjoying the benefits of hard work. It means navigating suspicion, stares, and the silent question, do you really belong here? Racism in elite spaces doesn't always show up with slurs or aggression. Sometimes it wears a smile. Sometimes it comes wrapped in policies and protocols. Sometimes it arrives in the form of unnecessary questions asked only to some. He wasn't trespassing. He wasn't loud. He wasn't violating any rules. And still, He was approached as if he were a problem. That's how racism operates in places like this. Not through overt hostility, but through constant scrutiny. It asks people to prove their place in a way others never have to. A white man in board shorts is invisible. A black man in designer swimwear is a concern. The same environment that's supposed to represent comfort becomes a battlefield of perception. For black professionals, every moment in those spaces is layered. It's not just a place to relax. It's a place where they're often asked to justify their presence with every glance and interaction. The pool was private, but the assumptions weren't. In communities built around exclusivity, the presence of a black body can trigger unspoken fears. The idea that certain races are inherently out of place in luxury is deeply rooted in centuries of structural inequality. These are not isolated incidents. They are part of a larger cultural framework that equates whiteness with safety and ownership, and blackness with intrusion and threat. Even when a black person has earned every right to be in that space, the space itself is often resistant to acknowledging it. This type of racism is slippery. It hides behind policy, behind civility, behind the idea of just making sure. It's the front desk clerk who checks ID for some, but not others. It's the neighbor who smiles one day, then makes a call the next. It's the security guard who assumes guilt before gathering facts. These are not accidents. They are the outcomes of long-standing cultural conditioning that trains people to see certain individuals as permanent outsiders, no matter how much they achieve. For black professionals who have reached a level of success that places them in elite neighborhoods, the challenge isn't just maintaining success, it's surviving visibility. Visibility that draws attention not because of what they've done, but because of who they are. Racism in elite spaces is particularly painful because it contradicts the very idea of what success is supposed to deliver. The promise is that hard work leads to access, comfort, and respect. But when that promise isn't fulfilled equally, it reveals how deeply racism is embedded into the social fabric of even the most prestigious environments. He built his company from the ground up. He signed contracts, employed teams, paid dues, financial and personal. He created value. And yet, in the eyes of someone at that pool, none of that mattered. What mattered was appearance. And in elite spaces, appearance often becomes a barrier instead of a passport. The tragedy isn't just that he was harassed. It's that this happens so often, in so many places, that black professionals develop routines to navigate it. They carry business cards not just for networking, but to prove legitimacy. They anticipate being questioned, and they prepare answers not to enlighten, but to survive. These spaces pride themselves on being inclusive, diverse, forward-thinking. But true inclusion doesn't mean putting up marketing photos with different faces. It means creating an environment where people are not made to feel like imposters in their own homes. Where success is not constantly questioned based on race. Where people can exist without having to announce their credentials. Racism in elite spaces persists because it's rarely challenged directly. It often hides in silence. In that silence, it grows. And when someone like him challenges it, not with anger, but with presence, it disrupts the entire illusion. It exposes the cracks in the idea that wealth and status are equalizers. Because in truth, they are not. Not when people of color still have to fight to be recognized as deserving of what they've earned. The very existence of a confident, successful black man in that setting is a challenge to the status quo. It shouldn't be, but it is. His presence alone becomes political, his every move interpreted through a lens that others never have to consider. That's the quiet violence of racism in elite spaces. It doesn't always shout, but it always limits. It creates a ceiling that can't be seen, but is deeply felt. It changes how people walk, talk, dress, and even relax. It forces them to stay ready, even in moments meant for rest. Because the space may be luxurious, but it's not always safe. And safety, in these moments, isn't about physical danger. It's about the exhaustion of constantly having to prove you belong in a world you helped build. He didn't flash credentials. He didn't rattle off titles or pull up a LinkedIn profile. He simply stood his ground, calm and certain, knowing who he was. In that moment, the weight of his identity wasn't something he wore like armor. It was something he owned. Too often, black professionals are expected to announce their legitimacy before they're taken seriously. They're expected to prove their right to exist in spaces they've already earned access to. But he understood that real authority doesn't come from proving your worth to doubters. It comes from knowing you don't have to. When the security guard questioned him, and the neighbor made assumptions, they were all looking for something on the surface, an explanation, an apology, a label that made them feel comfortable. But he didn't give them that. Instead, he gave them truth. The kind that doesn't need to shout. The kind that doesn't come with explanations or justifications. The kind of truth that stands tall because it's rooted in purpose. His very presence was a confrontation to every silent stereotype that lived in their minds. And he didn't run from it. He leaned into it. Reclaiming authority through identity is not about arrogance. It's about refusing to shrink. It's about understanding that every step you take in a space that wasn't designed for you is an act of quiet resistance. For generations, Black men and women were told to stay in their place. But when someone like him takes his place without asking for permission, he's not just asserting ownership over a property. He's reclaiming ownership over a narrative. One that has for too long tried to box people like him into roles that were never of their choosing. He had worked too hard to build a life where he didn't have to answer to bias. He had sacrificed too much to reach a level where his title wasn't just a nameplate on an office door. It was a reflection of a journey few understood. So when someone questioned him at that pool, they weren't just questioning his right to be there. They were questioning the very idea that someone like him could be the one in charge. That's what made the moment so heavy. It wasn't about pool rules. It was about power, and who society still thinks is allowed to hold it. He didn't let the narrative be shaped by their discomfort. He didn't soften himself to make others feel better. Instead, he stayed exactly as he was, composed, direct, unapologetic. There's a specific kind of strength in refusing to over-explain yourself to people who've already decided who you are. That strength isn't loud or flashy. It's in the posture, the eye contact, the refusal to step back. It's in knowing that the weight of your ancestors' labor, your parents' sacrifices, your own relentless work, is carried in how you carry yourself. And you don't put that down just because someone is uncomfortable with your presence. The assumptions others made said more about them than they ever could about him. But instead of responding with anger, he chose to let his identity speak. His identity as a builder, a leader, a creator, not just in the business world, but in how he shaped the space around him. His vision had brought this very community into being. The buildings, the branding, the lifestyle, all bore his fingerprints. And yet, none of that mattered to those who only saw skin first. But he didn't bend to that limited gaze. He rose above it by simply being himself, without compromise. When you reclaim authority through identity, you stop living to meet expectations. You start living as an embodiment of your own values, your own history, your own vision. That's what he did at that pool. He didn't ask for recognition. He didn't beg for understanding. He simply lived as he always had, with purpose. That kind of presence unsettles people who rely on old power structures to tell them who belongs and who doesn't. It forces them to confront the reality that power doesn't always come dressed the way they expect it to. And when power looks different, speaks different, walks different, it doesn't make it less valid. It makes it more urgent, more necessary. Because representation isn't just about who gets a seat at the table. It's about who built the table. And in that moment, standing still, grounded in his truth, he reminded everyone watching that he didn't just deserve to be there. He had helped make their possible. That's what reclaiming authority through identity looks like. Not demanding space, but embodying it so fully that no one can deny its rightful owner. They tried to humiliate him. With a simple question, laced with doubt and control. Do you live here? It wasn't a real question. It was a coded reminder that in their minds, he didn't belong. They didn't care what he wore, how calmly he behaved, or how respectfully he responded. They had already decided that his presence needed explaining, that his identity didn't match the image they had of someone who could occupy that space. In that moment, they weren't looking for information. They were looking for submission. They were looking for him to retreat, apologize, shrink. But instead, he stood tall and turned that humiliation into empowerment. What they didn't understand was that this wasn't the first time. It wasn't the first time he'd been followed in a store, mistaken for staff in a boardroom, or asked to justify his presence at a professional gathering. These experiences build layers of resilience. Over time, they teach you how to turn microaggressions into fuel. How to convert attempts at belittling into moments of clarity. How to take what someone meant to embarrass you and turn it into a mirror that reflects their own bias. He had learned how to navigate these moments with grace, but also with purpose. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. What he did was much more powerful. He owned the space. He spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove but everything to teach. He allowed their discomfort to sit in the open, without rushing to ease it. In doing so, he forced the moment to slow down. He made everyone present confront what was really happening, not a violation of rules, but a violation of assumptions. That's what makes these situations so revealing. They are rarely about policy. They are about perception, and he understood that fully. Every part of that encounter was designed to strip him of dignity. The tone, the suspicion, the way the question was framed. It wasn't just about getting an answer. It was about putting him in his place. But the power of knowing your worth is that no one else gets to define it. He didn't fight their insult with insult. He fought it with truth. He knew that their need to check him came from insecurity, not authority. They needed to reassert control because his presence disrupted their internal narrative. A narrative where Black success is still an anomaly, not a norm. The humiliation they intended for him backfired, not because he embarrassed them, but because he didn't absorb it. He didn't internalize it. He didn't let their words shape his self-image. That's the secret to empowerment in moments like this, refusing to let someone else's limited vision define your reality. He transformed the moment by standing firmly in his identity, by letting the silence between their question and his answer speak volumes, by allowing them to feel the full weight of their misplaced suspicion. What made the moment even more powerful was what it revealed to others. The bystanders who watched, the staff who listened, the neighbors who overheard, they all witnessed a man being wrongly questioned. And they also witnessed his poise, his refusal to be rattled. That kind of visibility changes people. It plants seeds. It forces quiet reflection, not just on what happened, but on how often it happens. And to whom. By turning the situation into a lesson instead of a confrontation, he claimed a kind of moral authority that no title or status can manufacture. There's a certain kind of strength that comes from knowing people expect less from you and giving them more. More grace, more dignity, more composure. That strength doesn't just empower you. It empowers others watching. It sets a new standard for what it looks like to lead under pressure, for what it looks like to respond to injustice without losing yourself in the process. He didn't have to make a scene to make a point. His presence was the point. When someone tries to humiliate you and fails, what's left is clarity. Clarity about who you are. Clarity about what you will and will not tolerate. Clarity about the gap between how others see you and how you see yourself. He walked away from that pool not as someone who had been questioned, but as someone who had revealed something deeper about the community, about their assumptions, about the limits of tolerance masked as politeness. And that revelation is powerful. It doesn't require applause. It doesn't need validation. It simply exists, undeniable and unshakable. They didn't see a CEO. They didn't see an innovator, a leader, or a man responsible for building a thriving business and managing hundreds of employees. They saw a Black man near a pool in a luxury complex, and that alone made him suspicious in their eyes. Stereotypes are not always shouted from rooftops. More often, they whisper through glances, assumptions, and quiet interventions. In that moment, every stereotype about who belongs and who doesn't came to the surface, not because of his behavior, but because of his identity. And he shattered those stereotypes, not with speeches or confrontation, but simply by existing in the space with confidence and control. Stereotypes are powerful because they are lazy. They flatten people into caricatures, assigning roles based on skin color, voice, or posture rather than merit, character, or achievement. The stereotype at play in this situation was clear. Black men are guests, not owners. Employees, not executives. Outsiders, not residents. That belief, whether conscious or unconscious, drove the reaction. And he knew it. He'd seen it before. In the eyes of store managers who followed him, in the overly polite tone of professionals who double-checked his credentials, in the way his presence in high-end spaces was always treated as something that needed explanation. But he didn't play along. He didn't give the stereotype any ground. He didn't try to disarm suspicion with charm or overcompensation. Instead, he let the moment unfold exactly as it was. a clash between assumption and reality. His very presence disrupted their internal logic. He didn't fit the script they had written for someone who looked like him, and rather than trying to fit in, he simply refused to shrink. His dignity was not something he performed. It was something he lived. Challenging stereotypes with success doesn't mean shouting about your accomplishments. It means letting your existence serve as evidence. It means staying present in spaces where others expect you to retreat. It means allowing the discomfort of others to sit with them rather than rushing to ease it. When he remained composed, unapologetic, and quietly firm, the narrative began to shift. The stereotype began to collapse under the weight of its own inaccuracy. That's the power of showing up fully in your truth. When reality confronts assumption, reality eventually wins. He understood that his success was not just personal, it was political, not by choice, but by context. In a world where Black excellence is often questioned, every act of presence becomes a statement. A Black man relaxing poolside is not just a man taking a break. It's someone claiming space in a world that has tried to limit his access to it. And claiming space is no small thing. It's an act of quiet rebellion, of historical correction, of generational healing, especially when done with grace instead of anger, intention instead of apology. He didn't need to give a TED Talk to challenge their views. His life was already the message. The work he had done, the companies he had built, the people he had mentored, all of that lived in his posture, his tone, his ease. When the guard approached him, they weren't just facing a resident. They were facing a man who had overcome every obstacle designed to keep him out of that exact environment. And now he stood, not asking for permission, but embodying presence that could no longer be ignored. Every time someone like him steps into spaces where stereotypes once dictated who could enter, those walls begin to crack. And it doesn't require confrontation. Sometimes all it takes is presence, the ability to be unmoved, to let your very being challenge the assumptions others carry. That kind of resistance is powerful because it's so unexpected. It doesn't come with shouting or outrage. It comes with stillness, with assurance, with the unshakable truth of who you are. He knew that stereotypes feed on distance, on lack of exposure, on separation. And every time someone witnesses a moment like this, where a successful Black man stands in quiet defiance of the narrative they've been fed, it forces a reevaluation, even if they never admit it. Even if they walk away embarrassed or defensive, a seed is planted, a false belief is weakened, a boundary is redrawn, and none of it required him to do anything more than exist with confidence. Success alone doesn't destroy stereotypes, but success that refuses to bend under pressure, that remains rooted in identity rather than shaped by expectations, that's what makes them crumble. He didn't just walk through that moment, he rewrote it, without asking for approval, without trying to change minds, simply by being exactly who he is, and letting that be enough to break the mold.